Brandon Brands.
Hi, this is Pauline Brown, author of Aesthetic Intelligence. If you want to know how to boost and use your own aesthetic intelligence for business advantage, you should listen to Brands on Brands on Brands.
In a world where advertising is ignored, business is exposed, and the only constant is change, how do you build a brand that matters? Welcome to Brands on Brands on Brands, a home for those who think different and push their boundaries. This is where branding that matters lives. Now, here's your host, Brandon Birkmeyer.
Hey, what's up, everyone? You're listening to Brands on Brands on Brands with Brandon Birkmeyer, your personal marketing coach. And I believe that building a brand that matters is the only way for a business to thrive tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in each week as we talk to thought leaders in marketing about how to help build your business and your brand. We do that every Monday. And on Thursdays, we dive in deeper, just you and me and the mic, on strategies and tactics you can apply today to your business. Today is an interview episode. I'm excited to bring you another thought leader in this space, definitely a different angle than we typically cover, called aesthetic intelligence, which I will get into what that is. But first, Pauline Brown is our guest. For nearly 30 years, she's acquired, built, and led the world's most influential global luxury brands. Most recently, she served as the chairman of North America for the world's leading luxury goods company, LVMH, Moet Hennessy, Louis Vuitton. If you guys got those Louis purses, you know what I'm talking about, where she provided regional leadership for about 70 brands in 5 sectors, including fashion and leather goods, watches and jewelry, perfumes and cosmetics, wines and spirits, and selective retailing. While at LVMH, Pauline also served on the board of L Capital, a private equity funded, backed by LVMH, as well as on the boards of several LVMH subsidiaries, including Donna Karan, Marc Jacobs, and Fresh Cosmetics. In 2018, she decided to write a book based on the learnings of her insights from a course that she started 2 years prior called The Business of Aesthetics. That book, which we are talking about today, is called Aesthetic Intelligence, How to Boost It and Use It in Business and Beyond. It was released by HarperCollins this past November 2019. And that's what we're diving into today. How to use the senses to help deliver your brand to your customers. That's sensory experiences. That's touch, taste, smell, feel, and all the ins and outs of that. The things we don't pay attention to, but that the good businesses out there that are paying attention to are delivering better customer experiences for their customers. And on the backside of that, getting better loyalty, more references and referrals, higher sales, more traffic, the things that you want in your business. We dive into topics like, how do you master the power of aesthetics? How do you get started telling your story using aesthetics? How do you, some real world examples of what good and bad aesthetics are. We dive into the book most definitely and get into, things like how to use things like fashion or image or other ways of curating your look and your feel to bring that experience to the world, to your customers. So lots going on here in this book, in this interview. I hope you guys learn as much from it as I did about being more thoughtful about designing your customer experience and designing your interaction and engagement with your customers from the beginning to the very end. And without further ado, let me bring to the show Pauline Brown. Let's get going. Check it out.
Brandon Brands.
All right, let's get going. I'm excited to bring to you today's guest. I am pleased to welcome Pauline Brown to the show. Pauline, first and foremost, thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me, Brandon. It's great to be on the show.
Now, this is going to be a little bit different for everyone. Before we get started, I hope my guest Pauline and you listeners indulge me for 1 minute so we can give you the best possible listening experience. I know that when you listen to this show, you may be in a lot of different environments. You might be in your car, at the gym, a lot of different places. To get the most out of this, I'd recommend 2 things. 1, pick a place where you can be alone with your thoughts. That means you have a distraction-free environment and a dedicated block of time. And number 2, feel free to be doing something that focuses your attention and brings your energy into your body. I love personally to be working out. You could be doing other active tasks that don't take a lot of brain energy, like walking and driving and washing the dishes. Any of those things work. That's my 2 tips for you right now. Thank you for indulging me. And the reason I'm giving you this advice, and this is not something I do every show, the reason I'm doing that, and I'm excited to talk with our guest today, Pauline, is that we're diving into aesthetic intelligence. And a big part of that is about designing environments and experiences. Pauline, how am I doing so far?
Yeah, great. That's as good an introduction as I've heard when it comes to aesthetic intelligence.
Perfect. Well, I've done my homework and I don't have all the senses to connect with the audience. I don't have the
There's
touch.
no aroma coming through the screen. What?
Not yet. I'm cooking some cookies in the background. So that's helping me, but it's not helping you guys.
Well, I think the listeners just have to go in the kitchen and start cooking.
All right. But I do have more than just words to work with. And these are things I'm picking up from reading this book here. There's tone, there's energy, there's articulation, verbal imagery, and more things at our disposal that are tools in our arsenal that I may be ignoring, or a lot of us might be ignoring, depending on what we're doing as marketers. Now, would you agree with that?
Well, I would agree that things that we are doing and have been doing for the last many decades as marketers are no longer working, and that marketers and other people in business have not adapted nearly to the extent that the marketplace has to this new reality.
Yeah, exactly. And now let's dive into this. And first and foremost, the book is Aesthetic Intelligence: How to Boost It and Use It in Business and Beyond. This is the book from Pauline Brown. That's what we're here to talk about today and more. And she also teaches a class on the business of aesthetics. So let's start by setting the stage with aesthetics, like the definition. How do you define it? Aesthetics and aesthetic intelligence. So we can all start with the same foundation.
Sure. Well, I should start by saying I was not an academic to begin with. That was a very late in life transition for me, and it did open the way to this book. And the reason I mention that is the vast majority of my career, almost 3 decades, was in the business world, and more specifically, working to build what were already pretty established and exciting, mostly premium brands, global brands. One of the things that I noticed over the years, starting with my decade in the cosmetics industry, moving into fashion and other areas of luxury, I even touched on wine and spirits and watches and jewelry, is that these are all businesses that essentially do not sell a single item anyone needs, especially at the high end, but across the board. Nobody needs wine. Nobody needs a watch. But people get great pleasure out of buying it, else these industries would not have lasted, in some cases, a few centuries, and they're still going strong. So, in the theory, as I worked in the luxury goods and design-oriented world, was that was fine for those kind of businesses. But if you work in more industrial-oriented companies or technology companies or healthcare or automotive or, you name it, that this had no place. Those industries were largely driven by efficiency, by economic sort of laws of economy around the scale and around the market power and around growing share and around speed, of course. And that worked for a long time for companies. It really doesn't work anymore because at some point you can't cost something less than zero. At some point you can't go, faster than, a nanosecond or a fraction of a nanosecond. So we've taken a lot of these inefficiencies out of most businesses, and companies are no longer able to compete just on that basis alone. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is it brings me to the topic of when I was first approached by the Harvard Business School. They were open to having me come to teach a course, and we were debating a bit what would the course be. I had spent the prior number of years as the head of North America for LVMH, which is the world's leading luxury goods company. They initially suggested, well, maybe it's consumer branding, or maybe it's around, global retailing, or maybe it's consumer marketing, and maybe it's luxury goods management. And I kept thinking, I don't want to teach people who are just going into the field that I just had left. I really felt that there were lessons from those businesses that could apply to the larger business world. And there was no reason that it was so siloed, that the value that they create in beautiful designs and beautiful experiences and lifting the soul and giving people a sense of humanity and of storytelling and of sort of rich aesthetic surroundings, that this could find its way. And we've seen examples where it has, very successful in all sorts of companies. And so they asked me in this discussion with Harvard, well, what would you call the class? And I kind of blurted out without having given it a lot of thought, well, it's sort of like the business of aesthetics. And they said, well, that's really interesting. Well, how do you spell it? Like no one even knew how, well, really, do you spell aesthetics with an A, with an E? And so that's the beginning of my journey that takes me to the book. And what was interesting to me in the first semester of the course is I expected, budding MBAs who were interested in the fields I had come from to take the course. I did not expect, and I was pleasantly surprised by the interest by people from all sorts of backgrounds and specializations, whether it was technology. I even had a few medical students. I had quite a few from the Kennedy School trying to register in and cross-matriculate. So that said to me, not only was my theory something that resonated for me, but that it obviously resonated for the marketplace, which in this case was the student body. It was a very popular course. And then I concluded that I really should take the ideas to a broader population.
Yeah.
And that's why I wrote the book.
So, and why?
So your question, did I answer what is aesthetics?
Yeah, no, it's okay. We can get back to that. But what stood out to me, like, why do you think it was resonating? So, like, why is this idea of aesthetic intelligence relevant today for businesses and marketers? What do you think about it?
Well, I'd say there's two things that come to mind immediately. So one is because we are, observing such radical change, in the, and it's not just that it's radical, it's that it's so fast. So here we're still getting used to like what it means to be living in this sort of omni-channel, virtual reality meets actual reality. So there's all of that, and the globalization, and at the same time a certain tribalism that's happening in government and in, I'd say, in general in population and economic standards. I mean, we're very bifurcated as a people and grappling with a lot of different issues. And yet the systems that are in place really haven't been built to address them and to answer to them. And so I think some of it is that the student didn't quite know what they'd get out of a class like mine. It was really, by the time I was, posting it as an elective, it was really still just in concept phase. So I don't think it's that they knew exactly what they learned. I think that they knew that they needed something above and beyond what was being taught. And that what was being taught, which hasn't changed that dramatically since it was, since I was in business school almost 30 years ago, that wasn't really giving them, it wasn't arming them for the kind of success that they all need, given the cost of their education and their general ambition. So I think that was one of the reasons. I think the other reason, which is a little more universal, and it's why I felt that this would work or this would interest an audience well beyond Harvard business students, is that it makes sense. Before we are professionals, we are people and we respond to things as people. And we all like to be, whatever our standard of living is, in spaces that feel right and good and comfortable for us, whatever our taste is. We all, it's human to want to sort of decorate yourself in the form of personal style, whether your style is minimalist or maximalist. We all are attracted to beautiful sights and scenes and things like music. We know from research that there are environments that can make us much more productive as professionals, that if we know that if we put certain colors on the wall and certain music in the system, that people work differently. And so it just makes sense that whatever business you're in, that this is sort of untapped value. And in some cases, I'm not talking high design. I'm talking very, very basic approaches to just how does that particular design element make a person feel, whether the person is a customer or an employee or a partner, whoever. They're still people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you've kind of highlighted a lot of things, which there's this dichotomy in a lot of cases. We're more connected than ever, but less connected. We are more aware of our surroundings than ever, but also less. Like there's a lot of that back and forth. Mm-hmm. But I do want to lay that groundwork. So let's for the basics of the conversation say, okay, like what are we talking about when we say aesthetics?
Yeah. So that was the first question you asked, which I didn't really answer.
No worries.
So aesthetics, I use that word very deliberately. It isn't design. It isn't beauty. Okay. Aesthetic objects can certainly look beautiful. It should be well designed. But aesthetics comes from the Greek word aesthetikos, which has to do with perceptive, so for example, if you think of an anesthesiologist, which we go because we want to numb our senses because we're about to have some surgical procedure. So aesthetics is really about arousing the senses in a pleasant or positive or exciting way. And our senses, obviously, we think a lot when we talk about aesthetics about visual elegance. very, very important. But I would say we live in a society where we put a relative or disproportionate value on the visual design, and we underinvest in the design of all those other elements around acoustics, around lighting, around textiles. Textiles, not just that should look good, but actually how does it make you feel and what's the effect on you? So when I talk about aesthetics and in the context of business, I'm talking about all of the elements that actually give you some sensorial reaction, positive or negative. Obviously, if it is an aesthetic one, if you achieve the aesthetics, it's a positive one. And how that enhances value. That aesthetic value actually creates financial value in the long term.
Yeah, it feels more holistic, which it was what I like. Because we've talked, I've heard, customer experience has been around forever, but that's not described in, I think, the same way. The images of like service versus the full experience, I think, come to mind. And then the other end of the spectrum, design has been something that's been around marketing forever. And because you've worked with luxury brands and businesses, but it seems like more than just the design, more than just customer experience with the service.
Well, the other issue, and you're right, there are certain buzzwords that have taken hold and have transformed some companies, but they have limitations. In most industries that are even a little bit sophisticated, there'll be some reference to what they call design thinking. People for years have been talking about design thinking. Design thinking, which I have a lot of respect for, and I know some very masterful experts in the area, but that is really about using design to solve a problem. So, for example, how can I get customers from A to B to Z without, more seamlessly? What it isn't about is how do I actually elicit delight? Why? Because delight is not something that you can simply design for in this problem solution approach. Delight is a feeling, and it's often aroused through surprise. So if you do customer research and you ask them, what would satisfy you? Or what would you deem an excellent experience? They can give you very clear metrics. But if you ask them, what would delight you? Often, whatever they tell you, I say, that's just, point of entry. That's just, that's table stakes. Because to be really delighted, they shouldn't be telling you. They should be, they should be, if you think about, and I could give you examples of the business world, but, in that, even take something as a fashion collection. If you just have a beautifully designed line using high quality fabrics on coming down the runway, but in a very predictable, nicely delivered, but predictable way, people really are not going to respond. They may say it was a nice, elegant collection, but that's not what stimulates a purchase, especially in a world where people don't need more clothes. But then you look at a wacky line like Gucci over the last few years, where they take, patterns that historically would have been seen as clashing, and they'll have very odd displays on the runway, like models going down carrying replicas of their head on their side. They'll have a campaign with outfits next to an actual peacock or a taxidermy peacock. That element of surprise, that gets attention, and it kind of tickles people. And so, it's a fine balance to do surprise well, but I would say you're never going to get the answer to that particular opportunity through customer research.
Yeah. And what's funny is you talk about that a little bit in depth in the book, and there's these wonderful stories about like ugly fashion and the idea that, it's true in fashion, but also in marketing, that there's sometimes it's the less perfect things that we are more attracted to, or an engaging aesthetic. But why does that work? Why does ugly fashion, if you will, work?
Well, so the reference that you're making, it's actually comes from a French term, jolie laid. So French word for pretty is jolie and for ugly is laid. And the term was historically used to describe a beautiful woman's face, where there's something a little off. It could be, Cindy Crawford's mole. It could be Lauren Hutton's gap in her front teeth. It could be Kate Moss having sort of very super wide set eyes that almost look, like a little, off, distorted. And it makes them that much more interesting and that much more compelling. Perfection is not interesting. So if you think of like the most beautiful scenery that you could see, let's just say it's, the mountains of Aspen, or driving along, Pacific One in California, and you're looking out at the ocean. There's nothing perfect about those scenes. It's not like, sort of that everything is lined up and it's symmetrical and that the colors have somehow been dictated so that they sort of all, in ombre fashion move into each other. That is nature. I mean, nature is not perfect, but nature is very rich and resplendent and exciting. And our eye, likes that. So long as that imperfection, is again done in a way that feels natural, that feels real, organic. I think when we see certain things with our eye that are imperfect, it can be discomforting. So there is a judgment that goes with that level of imperfection. But it also can feel, as I said, interesting and memorable. And by the way, if we were buying, whether it's fashion or whether it's a car, because we needed it purely for the utility, then what I'm talking about really has no relevance in this conversation. But 90% of what we buy is not for utility. Or if it is for utility, that may be why we bought a car, but it's not why we bought that Audi or even that Toyota. We picked that because it had some sort of emotional connection to us. And marketers make the mistake time and again of thinking a lot about functions and features and essentially utility. And you have to offer, the right functions and features, but you're not going to win on the right functions and features. You're going to win on the right emotional connection. And one of the most powerful ways to connect with people emotionally is through their senses.
Right. And as marketers, we do talk a lot about people, we got to be better storytellers. It is more than sharing the benefits, it's more than sharing the features. It is sharing the benefits or the transformation. And these are pretty common these days as practices. But I think we don't take that extra step, to your point, of delivering a fully thought out sensory experience with our products themselves. I think the ads are getting better. People have, we've figured out a lot of the tricks, if you will, make it doesn't have to be a perfect ad either. There's got to be something that stands out, or a more authentic picture of someone on Facebook will do better than a modeled ad will do. I think they figured out some of those formulas. But in terms of the extra step of delivering that product or that experience within the company, I think what opportunity could we be missing here?
Oh, so many. I mean, so first of all, we live in an age where advertising is not nearly as big a driver for why we buy and what we buy than it was when I was coming of age, which doesn't mean that traditional marketing doesn't have a role. It just, it's hard to really move the mark on that. I would say, I would divide out the investment in aesthetics into a few different buckets. Advertising to me is one, or sort of campaign management, campaign development is one, but it's a pretty superficial one. The first thing is product design. And, when you think of product design, whatever business you're in, and your product could be insurance product, right? And essentially the design of it isn't just, how much coverage you're going to offer and, what the cost is. But product is also how it's presented and how it's communicated. And every touch point around that product, from customer service to, the renewal bills, that every time you're talking to your customer in some way, whether it's around delivering the service or keeping the service as a condition and an opportunity for the customers, you have to really think about those emotional reactions that they're having, and how can you be both consistent in your voice and also pleasing to the individual on the other end. Because as I said before, before people were insurance customers, they were people. So that's point number one, is around product. Point number two is around what I'll call the experience and the service. So if let's say you have a dentist's office, and clearly you've got a lot of mechanics going into running that practice, from the scheduling to the hiring and training of your technicians to the setup of the equipment. But you also have a waiting room. You already have a coat of paint on the wall where the dental procedures are happening. And why wouldn't you give some thought, when it comes to choosing that palette on the wall, to, how does it make someone sitting in the chair feel? How does the floor make whatever materials you decide to use on the floor make, for example, a hygienist feels who might not be wearing sneakers? So that's also part of the aesthetic empathy, is that your constituents, whether they're customers or they're people who are delivering your service, should all, be given some thought and some attention. And so there's a lot of these elements, I call them invisible design, that go into an environment. If I ask somebody, did you have a good experience at the dentist's office? Aside from the fact that it might have been painful or expensive or whatever, usually people will remember things like, oh, they had a very nice attitude, at the front desk, or my dentist is very skilled. They won't remember that the particular shade of camel on the wall had a calming influence whilst all this very noisy machinery was going on, or, they were concerned about some gum sensitivity. They won't remember things. So you can't, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have a profound impact on how they experienced that particular interaction.
Right.
So
it affects how they feel.
Piece,
right. And they don't know it.
Does.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly does. So we've got the space. And then we've got all the things I call the symbols that represent what you're selling in the form of product and how you're selling it in the form of service. And that would be, for example, the campaign, or that would be, outreach efforts to just make sure that that people remember that you're a service that's available or a product that's for sale or whatever it is. So there's, I go back to when I'm talking about the aesthetics, I would say things like the ad campaign are the final step, not where you start in terms of really defining what is your aesthetic proposition. It's the final step of expression for that particular decision or set of decisions.
Right. And that makes sense to me. I mean, what's some of the funny, there's a lot of stats out there, but the thing that spoke to me when we're looking, like I looked at, customer loyalty. And one of the things that I've heard is that the main factor, like the only measurable factor, especially in a world where things are commodities and you can do the research and get something cheaper and whatever else, the only true connective measurable point that says, will someone come back? Will they stay a loyal customer? Is that you've created some kind of shared meaningful experience for that customer. Mm-hmm. Now, what that is, we can define and talk through, but it speaks to me that these kinds of things, whether you see them and notice them or that they're happening to you and just contributing to how you feel, it makes sense to me as a measurable difference.
Just as it makes sense to you, what I find is whether people have ever worked in a design-oriented company or not, it makes sense to most people because most people know, how they feel when they're in beautifully designed environments. It's why the Apple stores work so well. People aren't buying Mac products because the microprocessing power is superior to Dell's. They are, but the emotional resonance through all sources or all forms of design is so powerful that I think in their industry, they're really in a league of their own.
Yeah, exactly. And I definitely spent some time in marketing on Apple. And what's funny is like the whole unboxing trend, even like it goes beyond just the look and the design of the product. Even the experience of receiving the product, opening it has become part of it. The stores themselves that you walk into, what they look and feel like, and the how they've structured the encounters with the service team. All of that is all thoughtful parts of this that if they're a leader in the space on.
And I think one of the reasons it works with Apple, and this is another important point for others who want to go down this path to remember, is it's all about the details. It's not that all of a sudden you hire one fancy architect and who comes up with a sort of template for your flagship store, and then you're going to sort of give some sort of diluted version of that on all, or apply some diluted version on all your subsequent stores. It's about everything. And a lot of the elements, they do take time, they take thought, and they take taste. They don't always take money. I always say, because the assumption is that it takes a lot of money to do this well. When I think of the people I know in my extended circle who have the best taste, it is never the richest people. Because when you're very wealthy, you don't have to make trade-offs. And you don't necessarily have the discipline to sort of understand what you value and how things come together. One of the things that we'll probably get into in this call is that the final step in exercising and developing your own aesthetic intelligence, which is another word for taste, is curation. So it isn't just taking everything that feels good to you and putting it out there, but it's really understanding how things come together in a way that the final outcome feels so good. And that is what Apple attends to the detail. It has a consistency across all forms, from the product to the service design, to the campaigns, as per my earlier comment. And then it knows sort of how to express it in a way that doesn't feel excessive or unnatural. It really is a brilliant display of one founder's vision and taste, executed across 100,000 plus people in, thousands of points of location.
Right. And so you mentioned curation in this, and we do live in an era of abundant choices and lots of decisions. I mean, there's a million things now we can control. What's the value of curation for a business? If we can take it to, the entrepreneurs out there, the business owners out there, what's the value of curation for them? How do they apply some of this?
Yeah.
Like if they agree with the theory of it, how do they apply some of this to their
Right.
business?
Well, the second half of my book, I do go into that, and because I didn't feel it was enough to just make the case that this concept of aesthetics was powerful and maybe even our only differentiator in this very commoditized world. But I felt it was important to say, how do you actually bring aesthetic value into companies? And, my theory is that it starts with the top. It's very hard for people who are entry level to have huge impact if they're not given supports and sponsorship, and I'd say the attention it takes, because it does take time to do this well across an entire organization. And what starts at the top is this notion of an intelligence that is really a fourth step. Like when you think of what goes into developing great taste, because you don't have to be artistic to have great taste. Most tastemakers are not necessarily makers or artisans, but you do have to have a sensibility. And I'm getting to the curation, but that is the last step. The first step is really developing your own awareness of your senses and of what stimuli is out there that is affecting us day in and day out, sometimes minute in and minute out, that we have just, for survival's sake, learned to block. We don't want, especially those of us living in urban environments, to hear every jackhammer that's going by. We don't want to be aware of every fluorescent light that kind of makes the person I'm looking at have a sickly pallor. We block a lot of these stimuli during the course of our lives. And I'm not saying that we should, unblock it all such that we wouldn't be able to function. But I think we have to at least be aware, because the reality is whether you are aware or not, these elements are having an effect on how you feel and how productive you are and how maybe happy you are. So point number one is awareness, or what I call in the book attunement. You can't stop there, obviously. The next step is what I call interpretation. So it's one thing for me to be aware that certain colors lift my spirit, certain colors make my imagination go a little bit deeper, certain colors have certain effects on me. They may not be the same colors that would have that effect on you. And understanding when you have those stimuli, when I hear certain kinds of music, what mindset it puts me in, and the more aware you are, not just of what you're hearing and feeling, but the interpretation, what that means for you, I think is that next step. And the third step is what I call articulation. And that is something that Steve Jobs, for example, did so remarkably well. If you work in a company, and assuming you're not just a, sole proprietor, and you have a team, and the team could be 10-person team, it could be 1,000-person, but to really drive aesthetic value, you have to be able to articulate what it is that feels good to you, or what your aesthetic vision is, in such a way that a lot of other people can see it, embrace it, and execute on it. If you can't do that, it's going to be stuck in your own head, and it'll probably be a source of frustration because no one else can get there. And there's a lot components that go into what does it mean to articulate your taste and your vision. And then that final step, which is the question you just asked, is curation. So not just, what do I like? Why? How does it make me feel? And how do I explain it to others? But how do you bring it all together in a way that really works? And that, I think, most companies get wrong. So the way I would explain it is, if you were making a meal for visitors, for house guests, and you said, I want to make a really good dinner, and these are my 10 favorite ingredients. I love every one of them independently, so I'm just going to put them in one big bowl and I'm going to serve it. Clearly, that wouldn't work. And a great meal, as we know, can consist of very few ingredients, but they come together beautifully and in a way that feels special, and maybe even has that element of surprise or unexpected that I described earlier. So the curation it's really about editing. It's about editing such that you're even prepared to take some of the good things out to make the whole that much more exciting and memorable.
Right. And that less is more feels that simple is better feels very Apple as well. I guess that's why they're like one of the more notable brands that does this kind of thing.
Yeah, but even maximalist brands. So even take a Gucci, for example, which I mentioned earlier, sort of putting all of these different bizarre elements together, but they're still editing as well. In their case, the editing may be less around what do I take out, but how do I position things such that there's a story that's coming through, that it doesn't just look like chaos, pure chaos.
Gotcha. Yeah, this is awesome. And what I'm liking, if we take a break for a second, I want to make sure that the people who are listening have a chance to find you, connect with you. If you haven't read the book, found the book, you can go to Amazon. It's Aesthetic Intelligence, How to Boost It and Use It in Business and Beyond. Where can people find you? Where can they find the book? How do they connect with you?
So the book is sold in all major retailers. You can go to Amazon.com, to Barnes & Noble stores, or .com, Hudson. So it's out there. I have my own website. It's aestheticintelligence.com. And for those who caught the first part where there was a question about the spelling of aesthetics, it's AETHESTIC, aestheticintelligence.com. And also you can follow me. I'm pretty active on all social media. If you're looking for visual inspiration, then of course there's Instagram, which I'm Tastemaker Pauline. And Tastemaker is the name of my weekly radio show on Sirius XM, Tastemakers.
Perfect. And I'll put that in the show notes for you guys that still are like, I don't know how to spell aesthetic. I'm not even trying. That'll all be in the show notes for you. You don't have to do the work. It's okay. And let's take a step back for a second. I want to just hear about like you and the process. We've done a lot of the theory and the tactics because I wanted to get into the helpful stuff. But what did inspire you to write the book? You were teaching the class, you had these ideas, and you're like, I want to take on this process of, this 1, 2, whatever year process of turning this into a book. Like, why would you even bother? It's so much work.
Well, it is a lot of work. So what is it? It came out of, as do a lot of books and other inventions, it came out of frustration.
Right.
I did not feel that the business world was married to the real world in how it talked about whether it's consumers or marketplace, in how it functioned. I found most executives, and I, got to a fairly senior level in a few companies. I thought the more senior that they became, and I guess I became as well back in the day, the more removed they and we became from the reality of the buyer and who that buyer is, not just when they're, for example, in the store buying your goods, but, who they are as people and how they live and what they care about. We're still sort of focused on the demographics and the metrics. And there's so much discussion in the big world about big data and about automation and about robotics and, AI. And that's why when I talk about aesthetic intelligence, I call it the other AI. It's not that you can do away with this quantitative and technical facets of business. It's very, very important to manage big data. It just isn't sufficient. And what happens if you're lopsided, as most businesses are, toward big data and analytics, is that they become increasingly dehumanized. And they're dehumanizing for people who work for them, and they're dehumanized for the people who are experiencing them. It's why the department stores have gone so far south. Department stores and malls in general used to be entertaining, used to be fun. To me, it's hellacious. It's like going through an airport. I mean, you do it because you kind of have to. And I'm not just talking at holiday season, when the traffic is at its peak, even when there's no one in the stores, they're just deadly and deadening experiences. So I thought there were a couple of reasons this book had to get out. One was just, my own frustration that nobody else was really adapting their language or their thinking to a new world. I think some of it was, I also noticed, and this goes well past the business world, this is the education world, but it's also siloed. So if you study medicine, from an early age, meaning maybe 18 or maybe 20, 22, you're siloed. You're not expected or even given the bandwidth to study, art or art history or language. And similarly, I was undergrad a liberal arts major. I was an English major. And, I felt that I was not taken seriously because I was sort of coming from the world of soft learning. And then I went, to business school, and I went to a very rigorous, quantitatively inclined business school. And all of a sudden, everyone who I'm tracked with were interested in going into banking, and they're all kind of from engineering backgrounds. And I just thought that there were so few people that really had sort of integrated their thinking the way we should be integrating all elements of our life. And that was reflective of what the business world was doing as well. So I was in luxury goods, for example, and it was so siloed that I didn't even meet people who came there maybe from heavy industry or from technology, and that's not healthy. any form of homogeneity is not healthy. It's not healthy in ecosystems. It's not healthy, in governing bodies. It's not healthy in companies. And so part of what I'm pushing for is just to have more integrated thinking and to allow people to also bring more of their self, their personal self, to their work. I look around and I even think of myself earlier in my career where who I was at work in terms of maybe how I dressed, what my office looked like, even the language I used was a different person than who I was at home. And that's very strenuous to sort of live this bifurcated existence. And so, I encourage, and I talk a lot about it in the book, people to bring as much of themselves into their work life such that it becomes more organic and more enjoyable. And by the way, you are more differentiated, because I came to the conclusion only late in my career that there's only one thing in the world that I do better than anyone else. I mean, anything else you could point to, we'll find tons of people. Some areas I'm stronger than others, but there's tons of people in all areas that will do some particular facet better than I, or a particular skill better than I. But the one thing no one can do better than I is be Pauline Brown. And, why don't we double down instead of always focusing on areas of improvement in work environment? Why don't we double down on what we do so well and who we are and bring those values and those sensibilities to our work lives in a way that feels good and I think gets results.
Right. Well, definitely something that I think that these new ideas, this new way of thinking about it, I think is definitely needed. It wasn't there before. And within the book, you give a lot of great stories, a lot of good examples, real world examples of this in practice. And you've shared a few with us today. And as we have just a couple questions left here in our time together today, I would love to extract some more of those amazing stories of like the good or bad aesthetics that you've seen out there in the world.
So let me give you a great example of a really bad one. And they're both interesting because they, unlike say Gucci or Apple, they're probably not things you would expect me to pick up on and talk
Perfect.
about. So a great one would be who in the history of vacuum cleaners thought that a vacuum cleaner could actually look good, that it wasn't just designed to suction dust. And what's interesting, and I'm specifically alluding to Dyson here, which, innovated both in design and in technology around their own vacuum cleaner, is, that Dyson didn't start designing simply to look good. In fact, the big innovation, James Dyson, the founder, studied at the Royal Academy of Art in London. So he's an artist by training, and he studied interior design and furniture design. So he's very artistically disposed. But he actually had a patent that, and this is going back probably in the 70s or 80s, that allowed for the first ever bagless vacuum cleaner. So back in the day, you'd actually, suction the dust and the grime into a bag that would have to be changed every so often and fill up eventually. And Dyson was the first one that didn't require bags. So it was, a classic case of something that started with more of a utility edge. But I think that they also knew that particular innovation wasn't going to be enough to sustain the company and make James Dyson a billionaire as he is today. And the idea that they were so mindful about how for example, the various attachments, the hoses and so forth, and the nozzles, how they were screwed on such that it was easy on the hands. They were so thoughtful about the colors and how they came together for the different parts. And it really is a beautifully designed product. Even the original one, which is now, probably 20 plus years old, looks as modern today as anything I'd see from, a competing vacuum cleaner line. So I think that's one where they were able to really reinvent what we can expect from a device that existed for no other reason than a very simple and straightforward utility. And they, by the way, are able to charge a huge premium on it. They're well over $1,000, probably 2x what, comparably powered vacuum cleaners are in the market. An example of a failure, and I have quite a few, but one of the more prominent ones in my business lifetime.
I can't wait.
is, I would say, the introduction of Google Glass. So you remember,
oh yeah,
and I don't know if you were at the time. What's interesting about Google Glass is, and it was a debacle, and it didn't fail because the glasses didn't do exactly what they said they would do. It did everything that they said they would do. It wasn't a technological failure. And it didn't fail because the market said, you know what, I like it, but you priced it too expensive. I can't justify. Nobody ever walked away because, I think they priced it very carefully. it didn't fail because people didn't know about it. They had an enormous marketing budget and so much buzz. And I remember at the time I was in the fashion industry, and they even found a way to get those freaking Google glasses on models going down the runway. So they were certainly paying their way, and they were doing everything in the textbook form to raise awareness, to create buzz, and to research the hell out of this very expensive innovation. So why didn't it work? Very simple, because it felt so stupid wearing it. It felt stupid on your head, and it was a disaster in terms of, there's a gazillion memes if you Google it about, the Google Glass Man and, all sorts of funny things that people were saying on you sort of felt like your whole social status was at risk if you put it on. And it was a lack of empathy, not just because it looked silly, but because people started to shun other people who were wearing it, thinking that's just creepy. I don't want you taking, pictures or even have the capacity while you're walking past me on the street. So there was a bit of a sort of ostracizing that came from anyone who dared wear it. And so I say that's an example because, you look back again, it wasn't for lack of resources and lack of research, but you had a bunch of presumably engineering types in Silicon Valley who thought through everything except how does this actually look and how does it feel on the body and what does it say about me if I were to wear it, or what would I think of someone else wearing it? So that was an utter lack of empathy. I think that the Facebook, was under Facebook, but the Oculus Rift, the virtual reality headset, was also a real failure of aesthetics in that, VR is a very exciting concept. There's a lot of reasons, and certainly, if you think of the explosion of gaming, and high tech entertainment, it should have worked. But at the time it came out, I don't know, it was probably 5-6 years ago. Among many other complaints, people had it actually, because they designed it with in mind that there was one shape of head, and people's head shapes are pretty radically different. For many people, they got what they called dent. There was a reference back in the day, but it was like dents on the side, indents on the side of their forehead, by their temples. Because it actually hurt, and people were feeling nauseous wearing it. I don't know if you remember all the reports that were coming out. And so my point is that's aesthetics. That's not, it was delivering on the virtual reality front. It was just something that, on the body through the senses was a failure and wasn't considered properly in the preparation of its launch.
Well, I think those are amazing examples. And I wish I had an extra hour to spend with you today. You have a whole chapter on the future of aesthetics, which I think that everyone would be benefited to read where this is going. I think a lot of alignment with what we talk about here, which is things, being more human, more community focused, and think about how that plays out when you design products and services, and even how when you're speaking to people or in your sales process. And all these things can be applied to business to build better relationships with customers and build more loyal and fanatical audiences, which is what we all want. So well, thank you for having me and including me in this ongoing dialogue on branding. Really honored to be a part of the conversation, and I appreciate your kind feedback on the book. Absolutely. Again, it was a great book. You guys should get out there, get it on Amazon, Aesthetic Intelligence, How to Boost It and Use It in Business and Beyond. Pauline Brown here with us. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you. Thank you again, Brandon. All the best. All right. Thanks for tuning in to you guys and the audience, and we will catch you next week.
You've just taken your marketing knowledge to another level with this episode of Brands on Brands on Brands. But we have plenty more ways to not just help you build a business, but build a brand. Head over to brandonbrands.com for more resources, as well as access to our blogs, videos, and exclusive coaching sessions with your host. Be sure to visit brandonbrands.com.